The grand convocation chamber of the Galactic Concord was a monument to stillness, a cavern of sculpted obsidian and captured starlight where empires were brokered and wars were averted through the sheer weight of history. Light from 1,000 nebulae, piped through crystalline conduits, bathed the tiered amphitheater in a cold, analytical glow. At its heart, the central dais pulsed with the soft thrum of translation fields and gravitic stabilizers, holding the delegates of the galaxy's elder species in a state of suspended, tense deliberation. Here, silence was a language, and every subtle shift in posture, every flicker of a bioluminescent gland, was a word in a sentence of cosmic import. For cycles, this chamber had been the fulcrum of galactic peace, a place where logic and tradition outweighed the primal urges of expansion and fear. But today, the silence was different. It was not the quiet of contemplation, but the dead air before a storm. Speaker Prime Vorlag of the Cathar Ascendancy felt the tension as a physical pressure against his carapace. His species, ancient and methodical, had guided the conquered for millennia, their philosophy of immutable logic the bedrock upon which galactic law was built. He rested his primary manipulators on the cool, polished stone of his console, his multifaceted eyes taking in the assembly. The Xylos Collective, a gestalt consciousness represented by a shimmering cloud of sentient nanites, swirled with anxious energy, its usual placid blue hues now shot through with discordant flashes of crimson. Across the chasm, the Grackle warlord, encased in a suit of honor-scarred alloy that amplified his already formidable bulk, radiated an aura of barely contained aggression. And floating serenely in their containment fields, the Lumini, beings of pure, coherent energy, pulsed with a rhythm that bespoke deep, troubled thought. They were all focused on the same enigma, the same maddening paradox that had begun to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of galactic order: humanity. The species was a cosmic infant, barely a few centuries out of its cradle system, yet they had spread with a velocity that defied all known models of socioeconomic expansion. They claimed vast, empty swaths of the Orion Arm, territories the conquered had deemed strategically worthless, and settled them with a quiet, unnerving efficiency. They were polite, they were predictable in their trade dealings, and they were utterly, infuriatingly opaque. Their military presence was a statistical anomaly, a force so small it bordered on non-existent for the volume of space they administered. Yet no pirate clan, no opportunistic Grackle scout fleet, no territorial probe sent to test their borders had ever returned a conclusive report. They simply vanished, their last signals dissolving into a haze of sensor ghosts and inexplicable gravitic distortions. It was as if the space around human worlds was not merely empty, but actively hostile to observation. The data remains unchanged, the Xylos Collective projected, its synthesized voice a chorus of 1 billion synchronized thoughts, echoing through the chamber. The crimson within its form pulsed brighter. The patrol fleet designated Vigilance entered the Typhon Expanse, a system bordering the human Sol Federation. Its last transmission was a standard positional update. Moments later, conquered deep range observatories detected a gravitic shear event of unprecedented magnitude. The fleet, its attendant support craft, its very energy signature, ceased to exist, not destroyed in a manner we can comprehend, erased. Grackle warlord Earthag slammed a gauntleted fist onto his console, the impact sending a deep, resonant boom through the chamber. Erased is a coward's word. They were destroyed, annihilated by this silent, lurking species that hides its strength behind a veil of false pacifism. They build their empire in the dark, and we have allowed it. They have committed an act of war, and the Dominion demands a retributive strike. Let us see how their ghost fleets fare against the full might of the Grackle Armada. Vorlag's mandibles clicked softly, a sign of deep concentration. Warlord Earthag, your haste is predictable. You see a nail, and your only tool is a hammer. But we are not hammering nails. We are attempting to disassemble a paradox. The energy signature of the event does not correlate with any known weapon system in the Conquered's archives, including those of your own formidable armada. There was no exotic particle decay, no residual radiation, no debris field. It was a cessation. A null event. To strike blindly is to invite a response from a foe whose capabilities we do not even begin to understand. It was this very lack of understanding that gnawed at Vorlag's logical mind. The Cathar had built their ascendancy on data, on the relentless accumulation and analysis of facts. But humanity provided no facts, only rumors, whispers, and the chilling sill. And so where conquered fleets used to be. They had been invited to join the conquered, a standard gesture to any new spacefaring species. They had politely declined, stating they were not yet ready for such a responsibility. They engaged in trade, offering unique biological compounds and intricate software, yet they never requested strategic resources or military hardware in return. They were a civilization with no apparent ambition, no visible strength, yet they held a significant portion of the arm with an authority that was absolute. It was illogical. It was impossible. The Lumini's sovereignty, a being of incandescent gold, pulsed a gentle wave of calms across the chamber. Its voice was not heard but felt, a soft resonance in the minds of all present. Fear is the lens through which you view this unknown. You see aggression in silence. You see threat in mystery. Has it occurred to you that the silence may be a shield? That the mystery may be a warning not from the humans but for them and for us? A warning? Earthag scoffed, his voice a gravelly rasp. The only warning I see is that of a predator bearing its fangs. They have claimed conquered lives. They have destroyed conquered property. The articles of galactic security have been violated. The law is clear. A response is mandated. The law also mandates investigation and a demand for explanation, Vorlag countered, his voice steady and firm, cutting through the rising tide of aggression. We have dispatched a formal diplomatic communique to the Sol Federation. We have demanded the presence of an ambassador to account for the loss of the Vigilance fleet. They have agreed. A murmur of surprise rippled through the delegates. Communication with humanity was notoriously difficult, often filtered through layers of automated systems and diplomatic protocols that seemed designed to delay and obfuscate. A direct, positive response to a summons was unheard of. They have agreed, the Xylo's collective pulsed, its form stabilizing into a sphere of pure analytical blue. What were their exact terms? What is their estimated time of arrival? Their terms were simple. They will send one representative on one vessel. They will arrive when the convocation is in full session, Vorlag stated, letting the words hang in the air. He did not add the most unsettling part of their reply, the part that had kept his own logical processors running in recursive loops for the last rotation. The human message had concluded with a simple, chillingly calm sentence. We will be pleased to provide the clarity you seek. It is long overdue. It was not the tone of a guilty party, nor of an aggressor. It was the tone of a teacher about to begin a lesson the student was not prepared to learn. The immense doors at the far end of the convocation chamber, forged from a solid slab of neutron-degenerate matter and dormant for centuries, began to part. A low, resonant hum filled the air as containment fields disengaged. All eyes, all sensors, all psychic emanations turned towards the entrance. Through the opening, a single figure was visible, walking with a steady, unhurried gait down the long, ceremonial causeway. It was a human. It was female, clad in a simple, form-fitting dark blue uniform devoid of any rank insignia or ornamentation. She was flanked by no guards, accompanied by no retinue. Her vessel, according to the docking bay report, was a small courier, barely larger than a Grackle strike fighter and completely unarmed. This was humanity's response to an accusation of galactic-level warfare, a single, unarmed diplomat. Vorlag watched her approach, his analytical mind cataloging every detail. Her bipedal locomotion was efficient, her posture erect and confident. Her facial features, so soft and mutable compared to the rigid plates of a Cathar or the hardened scowl of a Grackle, were composed into an expression of serene neutrality. She carried no visible technology, save for a small data slate held in one hand. She was the epitome of everything that made her species so maddeningly enigmatic, an appearance of utter vulnerability that masked a reality of terrifying, incomprehensible power. As she reached the central dais, the gravitic lift elevated her to the level of the other delegates. The chamber fell into a profound silence, the weight of 1,000 star systems pressing down on this one, singular moment. The human stopped, her gaze sweeping across the assembly, meeting the multifaceted stare of Vorlag, the swirling form of the Xylos, the burning glare of Earthag, and the gentle glow of the Lumini without a trace of fear or intimidation. "I am Ambassador Eva Ristova of the Sol Federation," she said, her voice clear and perfectly modulated by the translation fields, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "I am here to answer your questions regarding the loss of the conquered patrol fleet Vigilance." The sheer, unadulterated calm of her statement was more disarming than any show of force. Earthag leaned forward, his massive form straining against his restraints. "Answer then, human. Do you confess to this unprovoked act of war? Do you admit to destroying a conquered fleet without cause? Rostova's gaze settled on the Grackle warlord. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet, almost sad patience. No, Warlord Earthag, we do not confess to destroying your fleet. We did not fire a single shot. We did not engage in any hostile action. Lies, the warlord roared, his voice cracking the stillness. Our sensors detected a massive energy event originating from near your borders. That is correct, Rostova replied, her tone unwavering. You detected an event, but you have misinterpreted its source and its nature. You assume that any power you cannot understand must be a weapon and that it must be ours. The universe is far more complex than your assumptions allow. Vorlag extended a manipulator, a gesture for silence that even Earthag grudgingly obeyed. He addressed the human ambassador, his voice a low, resonant baritone. Ambassador Rostova, the Conquered operates on the basis of evidence. Our evidence shows a fleet vanishing in proximity to your territory, concurrent with an energy release of a type we have never before witnessed. If not you, then who? If not a weapon, then what? Rostova's expression softened fractionally, a subtle shift that her species might call empathy. Speaker Prime Vorlag, your logic is sound, but it is based on incomplete data. For generations, we have maintained our silence, not out of malice or a desire for secrecy, but out of a deep-seated fear that you were not ready for the truth. We feared that revealing what we know would cause panic, fragmentation, and precisely the kind of military response that Warlord Earthag now advocates. A response that would be futile and catastrophic, but the loss of the vigilance forces our hand. It seems we can no longer protect you from this knowledge. She raised the data slate. What I am about to show you is not a simulation. It is a direct sensor log recorded by a human vessel that was present in the Typhon expanse. It was one of our sentinels, one of the many we have posted along the periphery. We call them observers. You have called them sensor ghosts, gravitic anomalies, warships. The central holoprojector of the chamber, a device capable of rendering entire star systems in perfect detail, flickered to life. The familiar star charts vanished, replaced by a new image. The perspective was from a point in deep space, looking out at the stardusted black. In the distance, the collected light of the conquered fleet was visible, a small cluster of brilliant points. The image was stable, the silence absolute. It was the view from the human observer. Your fleet was on a standard patrol pattern, Rostova's voice explained, now a calm narration over the unfolding scene. They detected nothing unusual. Their sensors, while advanced, are designed to detect threats that operate within the known laws of physics. They look for energy signatures, matter displacement, things that can be quantified and understood. On the screen, something began to happen. It was not an explosion, nor the arrival of an enemy fleet. The fabric of space itself seemed to blur. A patch of darkness, deeper and more absolute than the void around it, began to coalesce. It did not reflect light, it consumed it. Stars behind it were not occluded, but snuffed out, their light bending into the anomaly before vanishing entirely. It was a wound in reality. The Xylos collective began to pulse erratically, its synthesized voice a strained whisper. Spacetime metric distortion, impossible. The energy required would be equivalent to a supernova, yet there is no radiation, no thermal bloom. The conquered fleet, a collection of some of the most powerful vessels in the galaxy, seemed to notice the phenomenon. The points of light shifted, maneuvering into a defensive formation. Warning strobes began to flash. On the audio feed, a frantic translated voice from the Vigilance's bridge could be heard. Unidentified phenomenon, all sensors are failing. It's not reading as matter or energy. It's just a hole in the universe. The patch of absolute darkness expanded. It did not move towards the fleet in a conventional sense. Rather, space itself seemed to fold, bringing the anomaly and the ships into contact with each other in an instant. There was no flash of weapons fire, no explosions, no sound of tortured metal. The first conquered cruiser that touched the edge of the darkness simply ceased to be. Its light went out. Its energy signature vanished from the tactical display. One moment it was a kilometer-long warship crewed by thousands. The next it was gone, as if it had never existed. The process was silent, clinical, and absolute. The rest of the fleet scattered, engines flaring at maximum power. But it was useless. The anomaly expanded with impossible speed. A wave of nothingness that washed over the remaining ships. One by one they were extinguished, their frantic distress calls cut short in mid-syllable. In a matter of seconds, the entire patrol fleet was gone. The space where it had been was empty, pristine. The hole in reality then began to shrink, folding in on itself until it too was gone, leaving behind nothing but the silent, indifferent stars. The recording ended. The holoprojector powered down, plunging the chamber back into its dim, nebular glow. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before. It was a silence born of pure, undiluted shock, of a foundational understanding of the universe being shattered. Warlord Earthag was slumped in his chair, his aggressive posture gone, replaced by a rigid stillness that spoke of abject horror. The Xylos Collective was a chaotic storm of swirling colors, its gestalt mind struggling to process data that defied its every axiom. The Lumini pulsed with a slow, mournful rhythm, a funeral dirge of light. Vorlag was the first to find his voice. His mandibles trembled slightly, the only outward sign of his internal state. What was that? Ambassador Rostova lowered the data slate, her expression now one of profound gravity. We do not know what they are. We do not know where they come from. We call them the null. They are entities that appear to exist in a state orthogonal to our dimension, capable of entering our spacetime at will. They do not consume matter in the way a black hole does. They seem to unmake it. They erase it from existence. We first encountered evidence of them over a century ago, in the form of star systems where the baryonic matter content was inexplicably lower than models predicted. Stars that were, for all intents and purposes, hollowed out from within. She paused, letting the implications sink in. We realized that the galaxy was not empty. It was being culled, silently, methodically. We understood that to announce this to a galaxy of disparate, often conflicting powers would lead to chaos. It would lead to factions trying to weaponize the phenomenon, or worse, attempting to communicate with it. So we chose a different path, a path of silence, a path of vigilance. Her gaze swept the chamber once more, but this time it was not the gaze of a diplomat, but of a guardian. Our rapid expansion was not for territory or resources. It was to establish a sensor net, a perimeter. Our worlds are listening posts, our people the wardens of a silent frontier. The gravitic anomalies you detected, the so-called ghost fleets, were the signatures of our observers activating their primary systems. They are not warships in the sense you understand. They do not carry weapons designed to destroy ships or planets. They are something else entirely. Dark matter warships, Vorlag whispered the rumored name, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. It was not a boastful title. It was a literal description. A simplification, but accurate enough, Rostova confirmed. They do not operate in normal spacetime. They are shielded, phased, existing partially in the substrate of spacetime that your science calls dark matter. They can move without propulsion, observe without being seen. Their primary function is not to fight, but to watch, to learn. The energy signature your observatories detected was not a weapon discharge. It was the observer in the Typhon expanse activating its dimensional anchor to record the event with the highest possible fidelity before it, too, was forced to retreat. It was the closest we have ever been to a null incursion. Earthag finally stirred, his voice a low, humbled rumble. Your ship, it was there, it watched our fleet die, and it did nothing. What would you have had us do, Warlord? Rostova's voice was sharp, a sliver of ice in the heavy air. Engage it. Reveal our nature and our presence to an entity we cannot comprehend. The observer's primary function is to gather data so that one day we might have a chance to fight back. Its secondary function is to ensure the null does not become aware that the lesser life forms of this galaxy are, in fact, watching. To engage would have been to sacrifice our greatest strategic asset, our anonymity, for a gesture that would not have saved a single one of your ships. It was a cold, hard, tactical decision. The kind of decision we have been forced to make alone in the dark for a very long time. The chamber was adrift in a sea of dawning comprehension. Every piece of strange human behavior suddenly snapped into focus. Their lack of a conventional military, their polite refusal to join the conquered and share their strategic data, their settlement of worthless systems on the galactic rim. It was not arrogance or secrecy. It was quarantine. It was a self-imposed burden of immense, terrifying scale. Humanity had not been building an empire, it had been building a wall. The Xylos Collective, its form now a stable, deep violet, spoke again, its voice stripped of its earlier accusatory tone. The real core of your civilization, it is not expansion. It is observation, a long-term strategic analysis of an existential threat. The real core is survival, Rostova corrected gently. Not just for humanity, but for everyone. We have been watching the null's patterns. Their incursions are becoming more frequent, more brazen. They are moving from the deep voids between the arms into the more populated regions of the galaxy. The loss of the Vigilance was not a random event. It was a test. They are probing the Conquered's strength, its reaction times. They are preparing for a larger harvest. Vorlag felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's ambient temperature. The Cathar had existed for 100,000 years. They had charted the rise and fall of countless species, weathered stellar cataclysms and ideological wars. They had always believed themselves to be the apex of galactic civilization, the architects of a lasting peace. And all that time, a predator had been circling their home, and the only ones who had noticed were these young, silent, unnerving newcomers, humanity. They had been standing guard while the elders slept. He rose slowly to his full height, a gesture of utmost formality and respect. His multifaceted eyes met Rostova's. "Ambassador, you have accused us of basing our logic on incomplete data. You were correct. You have now provided the missing variables. The equation of our galactic reality has been irrevocably altered." He turned to the rest of the convocation, his voice ringing with an authority that had not been heard in the chamber for generations. "For too long we have been mired in petty squabbles. We have debated borders while a threat to our very existence has gone unnoticed. The humans have borne this burden alone. They have acted with a logic and a foresight that we, the Cathar ascendancy, can only describe as profound. Their silence was not an act of aggression, it was an act of protection, an act of sacrifice." He faced the human ambassador again. "The Sol Federation is no longer an outsider to be questioned. As of this moment, the Cathar ascendancy recognizes you as strategic allies of the highest order. We will place our analytical resources, our fleets, our entire civilization at your disposal. The conquered must be made aware. We must prepare. This is no longer a human problem. It is a galactic war, and it is a war we have been losing without even knowing we were fighting it." Earthag, the Grackle warlord, stood as well, his armored form creaking. He executed a formal Grackle military salute, a gesture of profound respect rarely offered to any outside his own species. "The Dominion was wrong. Your strategy is one of a true warrior. A quiet watch is a harder battle than a loud charge. The Grackle Armada will stand with you. We will be your sword and shield." The Xylos and the Lumini added their own assents, their forms pulsing in a unified rhythm of agreement. In the space of an hour, the galactic conquered had been transformed. The fear of humanity had been replaced by a far deeper, more primal fear of the void, and in that shared terror, a new unity was being forged. Rostova gave a slow, deliberate nod, acknowledging their pledges. There was no triumph in her expression, only the weary resolve of one who has carried a heavy weight for too long and is finally able to share it. "Your support is welcome. It is necessary, but there is one more thing you must understand, one final piece of data that frames the entirety of our struggle." She manipulated her slate, and a new image appeared on the holoprojector. It was not a recording, but a complex schematic, a three-dimensional rendering of a starship. It was vast, ancient, its design utterly alien, bearing no resemblance to any known galactic architecture. Its hull was scarred and pitted, vast sections torn away as if by a cosmic can opener. It was a dead thing, a ghost ship drifting in the interstellar dark. "This is how we learned," Rostova said softly. "This is the source of our dark matter technology. We did not invent it, we found it. Adrift, 1 billion kilometers from the nearest star in the Uit cloud of our own home system. It had been drifting for millennia, perhaps longer. A derelict." The chamber grew colder still. The implication was clear. "We spent decades carefully exploring it, deciphering its systems. Most of it was slag, but the core systems, the dimensional phase drives and the space-time observation arrays were partially intact. We reverse-engineered them. It is what our observer fleet is built upon. But the most important thing we found was in its central data core, the only part that had been deliberately shielded against the vessel's destruction. It was not a record of a battle. It was a warning." The image on the screen shifted to a series of glyphs, alien and indecipherable, but the translation appeared below in standard Conquered script. It was a history, a final testament of a long-dead species that had called themselves the Core Architects. They described a galaxy teeming with life, a vibrant network of civilizations eons ago, and they described the arrival of the Null. They detailed their long, losing war, their technology that could phase between dimensions to fight and observe, and their ultimate failure. The Null had learned, adapted, and consumed their entire civilization, their entire galactic alliance. The derelict ship was the last messenger, a time capsule of a forgotten apocalypse. "They were not from our galaxy," Rostova continued, her voice barely a whisper. This message, this ship, it is a seed. One of many, they hoped, sent out into the intergalactic void, a warning to other galaxies of the coming blight. It just so happened to drift into ours. Humanity was not the first to discover the null. We are merely the next in a very, very long line of civilizations to face them. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with the weight of a dying star. This was not a new threat. It was an ancient, cyclical, galaxy-consuming plague. The Conquered and its members were not the masters of their domain, but merely the current inhabitants of a house that was scheduled for demolition. The war is not about to